The first thing Dr. Octavia Monroe noticed wasn't the absence of the meal she had carefully pre-ordered. It was the tone. "We're out of your selection, ma'am. We only have the cold chicken sandwich today." The words came from a flight attendant with a polished bun, a clipped voice, and a look that skimmed past Octavia's eyes like she was furniture. No apology, no explanation. Just a tray with a dull sandwich on it and a glass of water that was barely half full. And then, the smile. Thin, mechanical, and designed to excuse everything. Octavia didn't speak. She didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't flinch, didn't lean forward to protest or pull out her phone to scroll for proof of her booking confirmation. She simply looked at the tray for half a second longer than most people would. A soft silence expanded around her, and in that silence, she measured the moment. She had taken this flight before, Stratus Air 917 from Boston to Abu Dhabi. This wasn't new to her. She flew international first class no fewer than a dozen times a year. Her dietary requests had always been honored, halal prepared, high protein, low sodium, and always with warm herbal tea on the side. She didn't ask for lobster or caviar. She asked for what she needed, nothing more. Yet somehow, the meal she had confirmed, reconfirmed, and had an email thread to prove, had simply vanished. And all the white men seated in rows 1C, 1D, and 2A, Wagyu beef, Dom Perignon, foie gras. The clinking of glasses and slow laughter echoed faintly over the hum of the aircraft. Becky Whitmore, the flight attendant, didn't wait for a response. She had already moved on to the next passenger before the tray had even settled on Octavia's table. Her heels tapped efficiently on the carpet, her voice sweetening as she greeted a silver-haired man with a warm, "Mr. Radcliffe, so glad to have you back with us." Octavia's gaze stayed low. She looked at the tray for another beat, then slowly reached for the cloth napkin and unfolded it. Not to use, but simply to place it gently over the sandwich. A long time ago, she might have spoken up, might have asked for the manager, might have smiled with teeth and said, "I'll wait for what I ordered. Thank you." But not anymore. She had learned the hard way that when you're the only black woman in the room, sometimes silence is louder than a speech. The tray in front of her wasn't just a meal. It was a message. One that had been sent to her 1,000 times in 1,000 variations. You don't really belong here, even if you're on the passenger list, even if you're on the board, even if you paid full fare and have 10 digits of impact behind your name. She took a breath and looked out the window. 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, the sky was dark blue. Below them, somewhere, were children learning to read using textbooks her foundation had funded. Women getting their first degrees because of the schools she had helped build. She wasn't here for a meal. She wasn't here to be served. But she wasn't here to be dismissed, either. From the seat across the aisle, a man in a tailored gray suit looked her way for half a second, saw the sandwich tray, and turned away quickly. Not his problem, not his fight, just a woman with the wrong meal. Octavia smiled, faintly. The kind of smile that meant nothing to strangers, but meant everything to those who knew her. She slid her watch around her wrist and tapped 3 times on the brushed steel side. No one noticed, not even Becky, who was still pouring champagne. But on the 42nd floor of a sleek building in New Haven, Connecticut, a notification appeared on a private terminal. GP41, Geneva Protocol, triggered. Back on the plane, Octavia gently folded her napkin again and placed it back on the tray. Her face was calm, her hands steady. She leaned back against the soft leather of seat 1A, not angry, not humiliated, just ready. Dr. Octavia Monroe glanced over at the in-flight safety card clipped to her seat back. Just another reminder that she was flying 37,000 feet above the Atlantic on Stratus Air Flight 9117, Boston to Abu Dhabi. She tucked the card into the leather pocket, her mind already racing ahead to the negotiations she would lead in less than 12 hours. This trip was bigger than any mere keynote speech or honorary dinner. It was a culmination of 2 decades spent building Monroe global education into a global force. Octavia had not always worn the mantle of CEO. 2 decades ago, she was Dr. Monroe, assistant professor of education policy at Harvard, lecturing to packed lecture halls that sometimes included the children of senators. Her research on free, quality primary education in developing nations had drawn modest applause and unflagging skepticism. Politics, they said. Bureaucracy, they said. She kept her focus on the data: literacy rates, school retention numbers, graduation statistics. By 2007, she'd founded the Monroe Global Education Foundation. Starting with a single pilot school in rural Kenya, she reinvested every grant dollar into building 5 more. By 2012, she was traveling to Nairobi, Dhaka, and Sao Paulo as a global consultant, drafting curriculum standards for governments and NGOs. UNICEF took note. UNESCO invited her onto advisory panels. World Bank economists cited her white paper on empowering communities through locally led schools. That was when the invitations began to change. Not just to speak at academic conferences, but to sit at tables where ministers and prime ministers convened. She struck the balance between measurement and empathy, the cold precision of numbers, paired with a belief that education was a universal human right. Under her leadership, the foundation raised $6.4 billion to fund 20,400 schools across 42 countries. Girls who might otherwise never step inside a classroom suddenly had books, desks, uniforms, and the belief that someone cared. Octavia didn't brag. She never bored strangers with her accomplishments. But the world learned, unmistakably, that she delivered results. Today's agreement with the Arab Education Alliance, the AEA, was a game changer. A $3.2 billion partnership, half funded by sovereign wealth, earmarked to upgrade infrastructure, train local teachers, and launch digital learning platforms across the Arabian Peninsula. Abu Dhabi would be the inaugural site. The ceremonial signing would take place under crystal chandeliers, surrounded by ministers draped in gold-embroidered robes. Octavia had been preparing for this moment for months, drafting terms, negotiating clauses to protect academic freedom, ensuring that local customs would be honored without sacrificing educational quality. She crossed her legs and drew in a slow breath as Becky Whitmore approached once more. Octavia's suit was navy wool, immaculately tailored to her tall frame. Her hair, tight coils gathered into a neat bun, reflected the cabin's warm light. She carried only a slim leather briefcase. Everything she needed fit on a single encrypted tablet. Yet Becky didn't see the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar foundation. "Ma'am?" Becky said, placing a fresh glass of champagne on the fold-out table beside Octavia's seat. There was no flicker of recognition in her gaze. No Dr. Monroe. No Ms. Monroe. Just ma'am, the catch-all term for any passenger whose name didn't warrant more effort. Octavia's lips curved into the smallest, most polite of smiles. She didn't correct her. She had learned, early in her career, that demanding respect rarely earned it. Instead, she let results speak for her. Completed schools, teacher trainees equipped, thousands of children reading fluently. But Becky's dismissal was a reminder that, in certain spheres, a woman of color could still be made to feel invisible. The rest of the cabin hummed with polite conversation and the occasional clink of crystal. A silver-haired executive in 1C gushed about his Gulfstream upgrade. In 1D, a retired oil tycoon toasted his partner with Dom Perignon. They laughed, arms leaning into each other as if sharing a secret. Octavia observed them in silence. No envy, no resentment, only a quiet form of calculation. She was used to boardrooms where alliances shifted by the hour. Human behavior, she thought, was not all that different at 35,000 feet. Becky adjusted the tray table for the man in 2A, giving him practically a bow. "Can I get you anything else before takeoff?" she asked. He nodded, as though she'd just asked if he wanted his shoes polished. Octavia folded her hands in her lap. Every detail, every nuance, she registered. The angle of Becky's posture, the inflection in her voice, the ease with which she devoted time to others but spared Octavia only a perfunctory nod. Octavia allowed herself one small moment of inward satisfaction. She never did meals for pleasure. Her appetite had been honed for efficiency. Fuel, not indulgence. As her flight attendant fussed over white, tip-heavy passengers, she leaned back to review her notes. In 7 minutes, she would activate the signal that sent a high-priority alert to Charles Edmonds, CEO of Stratus Air. A global airline might be slow to change its policies, but it was quick to act when shareholder value or public image was at stake. Camcorders were not allowed, but the cabin's integrated service cameras, equipped with Ivy League-calibrated AI courtesy of a Morgan Tech spin-off, were quietly transmitting. Within 11 minutes, the footage of Becky's dismissive shrug and the empty halal meal tray would trigger an emergency ethics review under the Geneva Protocol 41. By minute 14, the directive would reach Edmonds' private line. And before they even reached the Atlantic's midpoint, Becky would learn that her career was over. Octavia tapped her watch twice. A microsecond later, a secure message lit up her screen. Received. Initiating GP41. ETA. 12 minutes. She closed the tablet with a soft click. She didn't sigh or smile. She simply returned her gaze to the window, where a distant layer of clouds trailed like a promise. On the ground, kids would open their new classrooms with fresh chalkboards and colorful textbooks. Ministers in Abu Dhabi would prepare their speeches, and somewhere in the back of that gleaming cabin, a flight attendant would hear the coldest words of her life. Octavia Monroe took one final look at the amber strip of sky beyond the window and sat perfectly still, not angry, not triumphant, just ready. Octavia folded her hands on the tray table, her eyes drifting over the pristine white tablecloth that spread like a canvas before her. Gone was the anticipation she'd felt when the purser handed her the menu at takeoff. Now she stared at the cold chicken sandwich, its limp lettuce peeking from between 2 slices of dry bread. A single olive sat next to it, rolling slightly when the plane hit a minor bump. A half-empty glass of water glinted under the recessed cabin lights. Across the aisle, the cabin buzzed with genteel conversation. Mr. Lachlan leaned back in his seat 1C, swirling red wine in a crystal glass and discussing Gulf oil futures. In 1D, the retired ambassador, draped in a tailored gray blazer, laughed at his companion's joke about embassy life, his champagne flute chiming gently against his plate of caviar and smoked salmon. Nearby, someone offered foie gras to their neighbor. Soft laughter rippled among them, as if first class were a private club where membership came with privileges she had somehow forfeited. Becky Whitmore reappeared, a tray in hand and a polite smile fixed in place. She moved fluidly, her posture impeccable, her bun styled so tightly that not a coil fell out of place. She knelt slightly before Mr. Lachlan, placing the tray of Wagyu beef and a duo of sauces in front of him, then straightened for a curt nod. "Please enjoy your meal, Mr. Lachlan," she said, voice light as the champagne foam. He nodded appreciatively, leaning forward to taste the first bite. Octavia's breathing slowed as she watched Becky's every move. This was not about culinary preference or a glitch in the system. She had taken steps to guarantee her halal request. Emails, texts, confirmation codes. Yet here sat a flimsy sandwich. Becky wouldn't meet her eyes. The attendant's glance skimmed Octavia's name tag as if it were a typo. No apology, no explanation, not even a hint of discomfort. When Becky set the plate down, there was a crispness in her movements, a silent insistence that Octavia was not one of their kind. A subtle ache pooled in Octavia's chest. Not indignation, but the familiar sting of invisibility. She remembered the boardroom in Nairobi where a male minister referred to her as the young lady, while addressing the male co-presenter. She recalled the conference hall at Oxford where the moderator asked her assistant to introduce her instead of inviting her to speak directly. But those were isolated moments, scattered like pebbles on a path. Here, the disregard was consistent, woven into each breath of the cabin air. Octavia placed one hand over the sandwich, palm flat, as though feeling its texture would somehow restore her presence. The bread gave slightly under her fingers, cold and unyielding. She lifted her gaze to Becky as the attendant moved down the aisle to refill a glass for the oil tycoon in 2A. Becky paused mid-step, glanced at Octavia's half-empty water glass, then looked away without offering a replacement. The message was unmistakable. Her thirst did not matter. Silence stretched. Octavia's heart beat steadily, a measured drum in the hush. She did not reach for the sandwich. She did not press the call button. Instead, she let her silence shape the moment, drawing attention to the slight imbalance around her. The cabin's plush upholstery, the soft hum of engines, the muffled conversation, all became background to the cold tray that signified something far more corrosive than a missing entree. The next passenger received a lavish array of petits fours and macarons the color of blush. Becky leaned in close, whispering each flavor as if it were a cherished secret. Octavia's ears picked up only the plastic tinkle of the dessert forks and the coo of delight from the young woman in 1B. Octavia closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. There would be time for confrontation later, public, decisive, irreversible. For now, she observed and recorded. She shifted in her seat to face the window again. The sky outside was a canvas of ink, dappled by distant stars. Somewhere below, container ships plowed through dark waters, unaware that half the world's children were growing up with textbooks funded by Monroe Global Education. For them, education was a lifeline, and for Octavia, the next 12 hours would determine whether thousands more could access it. She inhaled, the leather scent of her seat mingling with recycled air, and exhaled with calm resolve. Becky returned, this time to straighten Octavia's napkin, an act so condescending Octavia could almost hear the patter of pity behind it. "Is there anything else I can get you, ma'am?" she asked, a practiced warmth in her voice. There was no apology, no recognition of the insult, just an obligation performed poorly. Octavia offered a slight shake of her head, the smallest motion. Without a word, she slid her hand into the pocket of her briefcase and felt the sleek edge of her smartwatch. 2 taps sent a secure signal back to headquarters. She didn't flinch, didn't divert her gaze. Becky turned away, unaware that her evening had been marked not by a customer complaint, but by a strategic move that would ripple through the airline's highest levels. Octavia Monroe settled back again, letting the cabin's soft murmur wash over her. She would not taste that chicken sandwich. She would not give Becky the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she would let the system, one founded on data, documentation, and deadlines, deliver the final verdict. In a few minutes, someone in Geneva would read a flagged report. Someone else would open a video clip showing Becky's dismissive shrug. And when the chain of command realized the magnitude of what had happened, they would act. But right now, she remained still, a quiet figure in the plush seat 1A, the silent pivot around which the rest of the flight revolved. The sandwich sat untouched. The water remained half full, and in that deliberate stillness, she had already started winning. Octavia Monroe sat perfectly still in the plush leather of seat 1A, the half-empty water glass at her side forgotten. She raised her wrist, brushing a fingertip across the smooth screen of her smartwatch. In one fluid motion, she toggled through encrypted menus until a terse, 2-character code appeared. GP41, Geneva Protocol 41, the emergency clause for egregious service discrimination. With a deliberate tap, she confirmed the trigger. No fanfare, no announcement. Just a silent pulse of data flowing from her wrist into the global command network. Across the cabin, the soft hum of engines and low murmur of first-class conversation continued, as though nothing had happened. Nobody noticed the discreet vibration at Octavia's wrist. Nobody saw her lips curl into the smallest, most knowing of smiles. She leaned back, folding her hands across her lap, her expression the very picture of calm resolve. Inside, her mind raced through every step of what was about to unfold, but she allowed only her eyes, their sharp focus, to betray the storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. Nearly 600 miles away, on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in New Haven, Connecticut, Aaliyah Grant's workstation blinked to life. Lines of code scrolled up her screen as the same GP41 alert landed in her inbox with top priority. Aaliyah, Octavia's longtime executive assistant and former data analyst, pressed her lips together in a reflexive nod. Everything they had prepared for this moment, symmetrical to the hours Octavia had spent negotiating clause revisions for the AEA MOU, had led to this very instant. She opened the secure dashboard labeled Internal Ethics Response and scanned the incoming violation report. The interface gleamed with efficiency. Incident: Service Discrimination. Seat 1A, Flight 917 customer, Dr. Octavia Monroe. Platinum member, GP41 authorized issue. Attendant: Rebecca A. Whitmore, Senior Cabin Crew, ID STA9035, timestamp 0015, flight time. Violations: unfulfilled special meal request, disparate service treatment. Aaliyah's fingers moved across the keys, retrieving the real-time service logs for Flight 917. Within seconds, she overlaid the cabin's AI-powered video footage, an integrated system courtesy of Morgan Tech's security subsidiary, onto the incident report. The video feed showed Becky's clipped shrug as she abandoned Octavia's tray in favor of other passengers. Aaliyah flagged the timestamp and opened a second tab to test the partnership matrix between Stratus Air and the Arab Education Alliance. Sure enough, Stratus Air was listed as the transportation partner for the upcoming AEA calendar year, a connection Octavia had stipulated in her MOU draft. If the AEA execs caught wind of a discrimination scandal tied to their agreed-upon partner, the entire $3.2 billion project could be suspended. Aaliyah paused over the Notify button, then clicked. Immediately, two secure lines lit up on the dashboard. One to Charles Edmonds, CEO of Stratus Air, and another to Stratus's Global Compliance Unit. A red banner blinked on Edmonds' private interface. Emergency Protocol 41 triggered Flight 917, discrimination report, GP41 authorization simultaneously. An email landed in the inbox of Helene Al-Fahim, the AEA Undersecretary for Partnerships. Subject: urgent. Ethics review requested. Stratus Air Flight 917. Body: per clause 14.b of our partnership agreement, we have a potential breach of conduct involving a senior guest. Pending review. All funding disbursements for the Abu Dhabi launch are on hold. Within 3 minutes, Aaliyah watched the status indicators shift from pending to critical. The Global Compliance Unit confirmed they were initiating containment and response. Edmonds' interface flashed again with a new message. Approve live intervention. Aaliyah clicked yes, authorizing a real-time video link between Octavia's smartwatch and the Stratus Air cabin network. Back in the cabin, Becky Whitmore was adjusting a passenger's pillow when her tablet, slung over a hook on the service cart, chirped. A small red dot glowed at its corner, an unusual alert tone for a device reserved for internal memos. She frowned, her polished composure faltering for the briefest moment. The tablet automatically switched to a secure video channel. The next thing she saw was the stern visage of Charles Edmonds, displayed above her own reflection. Octavia felt the vibration in her wrist just as Becky's shoulders stiffened. Neither the rest of the cabin nor Becky's colleagues, unaware of the unfolding high-level drama, noticed the change. Becky's eyes darted down to her tablet. Rebecca A. Whitmore, you are hereby terminated, effective immediately. Step aside from passenger duties at once. This action is non-negotiable and applies to all Stratus Air operations. CE. The room seemed to freeze around Octavia. The soft glow of reading lights, the soft hush of conversation. Everything turned still in her field of vision. Aaliyah's screen in New Haven confirmed the live intervention had been executed. Octavia, unmoved in her seat, watched Becky's face blanch. Then, with the same effortless grace she had employed all evening, Octavia leaned back and regarded the dining tray which symbolized her insult. She allowed the edges of her lips to lift in a faint, satisfied smile. The system had spoken. The protocol had unfurled precisely as designed, all without a single raised voice. For the other passengers, this was an odd, unexplained moment. Becky Whitmore, pride of Stratus's first-class service, stepped away from her cart. Daniel, the junior attendant, looked to Octavia uncertainly. His eyes flicked between her and Becky's retreating figure. He offered Octavia a polite nod, then turned toward the galley, whispering to pull up a replacement attendant. Octavia returned her gaze to the window, the faint glow of dawn touching the horizon. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. In her mind, she was already drafting the closing clauses of the AEA MOU, now reinforced with the unspoken message that in a world built on systems and protocols, respect could be codified and enforced. Her watch vibrated a final time. GP41 resolution complete. She pinched the bridge of her nose for a moment, then straightened. She had secured more than a meal. She had secured accountability. And as the plane sliced through the pre-dawn sky, Octavia Monroe sat ready for whatever came next. Dr. Octavia Monroe sat back in her seat, hands resting lightly on the cool leather arms of 1A. Around her, the cabin had returned to its low hum, soft chatter, the distant trill of a call button, the clink of glass on a passing trolley. Yet inside her mind, a different current stirred, pulling her back through time to moments when the world tried to shrink her reputation to someone else's comfort. She remembered the United Nations Education Summit in 2004, her first major international conference. The room was vast, chandeliers cascading light onto mahogany panels, delegates in silk robes seated before a long dais. Octavia, then an assistant professor and rising star in comparative education, took the podium clutching her speech notes. She began to speak on community-led schooling models, her voice measured, her data compelling. 5 minutes in, a delegate called out, "Excuse me, could the moderator introduce our next panelist? We seem to have misplaced our speaker." Heads turned. She paused, surprised, as the moderator, an older gentleman from UNESCO, leaned in and asked her assistant, a younger white woman standing to the side, "Could you please come up and introduce Dr. Monroe?" In that heartbeat, Octavia's presence wavered. She stepped down, allowed the assistant to stand in place of the speaker. The audience applauded politely as the assistant recited Octavia's accomplishments, leaving Octavia standing off to the side, her throat tight. By the time she rejoined the dais, the spotlight had shifted. The Minister of Education nodded sympathetically, but the doubt lingered. If they couldn't recognize her authority at face value, how could they trust her vision? Later that evening, Octavia found herself alone on a balcony overlooking New York's East River. The lights of Roosevelt Island shimmered below, and she allowed herself a slow, deliberate inhale. She thought, "Never again will I let someone else speak my truth." From that point on, she vowed to control the narrative, her voice, her terms, her timing. A decade later, in 2012, Octavia found herself at the University of Oxford, invited to discuss digital literacy in emerging economies. The lecture hall, one of Oxford's oldest, cradled her in centuries of knowledge. Students and faculty leaned forward, notebooks open, ready for insight. Immediately after her introduction, the moderator spoke a single sentence. "Dr. Monroe, if you'll excuse me, perhaps your assistant can distribute the materials while I ask you a few questions up here." Octavia, standing at the front, bit back the flicker of irritation. She watched as her assistant moved among the rows, handing out flyers detailing Octavia's infographic on mobile learning. Meanwhile, the moderator smiled and asked, "So, Doctor, tell us about your work in Kenya." The subtle implication stung. "Your work is impressive, but you need help reaching the audience." That afternoon, as she signed books in the campus bookstore, a student approached with trembling enthusiasm. She asked Octavia to autograph beside the phrase, "To my inspiration." The student confessed that she'd almost skipped the talk because she thought Octavia was the assistant. Octavia smiled and wrote, Know your worth, and never let anyone else define it. She realized then that each flash of dismissal was fueling her resolve, sculpting her into the kind of leader who could rewrite the scripts of those who underestimated her. Then came 2015, the Global Education Forum in Berlin, where Octavia presented on a panel alongside two white male CEOs of major edtech firms. During the Q&A, a young journalist asked her co-presenter, "Given that you're a woman in this sector, do you think policies promoting gender equality played a bigger role than market forces in your company's growth?" She posed the question gently, but the subtext was unmistakable. If you're successful, is it because of your work or because someone handed you an advantage? Octavia paused, then replied, "I believe success comes from meeting 3 times the challenges of others, while delivering half the expected results, proving your value every single day." The audience quieted, respect rippling through the hall. She had reframed the question on her own terms. It wasn't about handouts or quotas. It was about merit meeting persistent effort. Back in 2018, Octavia chaired a roundtable at the World Bank where ministers from 4 continents debated funding priorities. As she outlined a proposal for locally led teacher training, an oil magnate in the back row whispered to his neighbor, "She sounds smart, but is she really qualified to manage $500 million?" He chuckled, and his companion nodded. Octavia held her smile, straightened her posture, and ended her pitch with, "I'm not asking for your vote of confidence. I'm here to earn it. Every contract, every outcome, every life changed." That night, she watched the magnitude of her words settle among the delegates, turning skepticism into collaboration. Now, all those memories swirled together in her mind, triggered by the cold sandwich and silent shrug of a flight attendant named Becky Whitmore. Octavia closed her eyes for a moment, resting her forehead gently against the headrest. She visualized the hundreds of children who would walk into sunlit classrooms because of the Abu Dhabi Agreement. She thought of the teachers who would receive ongoing training, the communities that would build libraries in dusty villages, the policymakers who would cite her research in crafting national curricula. Her heart steadied. The sting of past dismissals gave way to a broader clarity. Every underestimate, every slight, had been a step on the ladder that brought her here. They had forged in her a resiliency that didn't erupt in anger, but crystallized into decisive action. Octavia opened her eyes and glanced at her watch. 12 minutes until landing. 2 minutes until the AEA clause would automatically trigger a funding freeze. 14 minutes until Becky Whitmore learned that her career on Stratus Air was over. Octavia folded her hands in her lap and leaned to the side, offering the first genuine smile she'd allowed herself in hours. Not for Becky, not for the cabin, for herself, Dr. Octavia Monroe, the woman who had endured every shadow of doubt and now commanded respect without uttering a single raised voice. The soft glow of the first-class cabin felt almost surreal after the abrupt firing. As Octavia Monroe settled back into her leather seat, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. But the atmosphere around her had subtly shifted. Whispers drifted through the rows. Some passengers glanced her way. Others leaned forward in hushed conversation. No one met her eyes. They didn't want to know what had just happened. To them, this was a spectacle, not a moment of reckoning. Becky Whitmore, meanwhile, stood at the center aisle in a disbelieving daze. Her meticulously arranged blonde bun now seemed out of place, a fragile badge of dignity that no longer fit. She pressed her lips together, drawing in a breath, and attempted to steady herself. It was then that Daniel Clean, the junior attendant, approached Octavia's row. He carried a silver tray bearing a perfectly cooked fillet of beef, roasted root vegetables, and a petite panna cotta drizzled with raspberry reduction, a stark contrast to the limp chicken sandwich and rolling olive of Chapter 3. "Dr. Monroe," Daniel said quietly, bowing his head, "please accept our sincere apologies. We'd like to offer you a full dinner service." There was genuine concern in his voice, an earnestness that Becky had never extended to Octavia. Octavia offered a small nod of thanks. "Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it." She laid her napkin on her lap and for the first time since takeoff, she accepted the tray. The warm aroma of rosemary and garlic eased the tension in her shoulders. Across the aisle, Becky had finally dropped her service cart and retreated 2 rows back, near the galley. A few passengers near her exchanged sympathetic looks. One woman in 2F, a cosmopolitan tech executive, patted Becky gently on the arm. "Take all the time you need," she whispered. Becky closed her eyes for a heartbeat, as though she were trying to stamp out the embarrassment in her chest. But for Octavia, the focus wasn't on sympathy for Becky. It was on the patterns of exclusion that Becky had embodied for years. Now that Becky's position of authority had been stripped in an instant, the raw truth of it all seemed laid bare. The cabin crew had been trained on service protocols, but unwritten codes of favoritism had governed their actions. Codes that privileged white faces, heavy wallets, and familiar names. As Daniel poured a gently steaming cup of chamomile tea into Octavia's crystal cup, the older executive in 1C cleared his throat and leaned toward his companion. "Quite the show, isn't it?" he murmured, nodding at Becky's retreating figure. His companion, an oil investor in a tailored navy suit, smiled indulgently. "Well, she got what she deserved," he said. "But really, it's just business." The words struck Octavia's ears like cold water. For those men, Becky's misstep was a minor inconvenience in a world that ran on power plays and shareholder margins. But for Octavia, herself accustomed to the scrutiny of boardrooms and the hush of political chambers, this was more than business. It was a vindication of a lifetime spent proving her worth in rooms that weren't built for people who looked like her. She lifted her teacup and sipped, letting the warmth spread through her. This dinner was more than a meal. It was a restoration of respect, yet she knew the danger of resting too easily. The subtle expressions of prejudice that Becky had enacted lived on in countless other interactions. Call buttons ignored, name pronunciations botched, tray tables adjusted awkwardly. Daniel set down the water carafe and returned to tidy her tray. "If there's anything else you need, Dr. Monroe, just press the call button," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. His eyes met hers for an instant, and she saw a flicker of understanding, a realization that service must be genuine, not mechanical. Octavia nodded, offering him a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Daniel." As he stepped away, she considered the fine line between protocol and prejudice. Becky had followed the airline's formal policies. She had served first-class passengers in order of their booking status. But the unwritten criteria Becky employed, thinly veiled judgments based on race and perceived worth, were the real transgressions. The recorded incident report noted disparate treatment, but it couldn't fully capture the sting of being made invisible. The overhead lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for in-flight entertainment. Octavia closed her eyes for a moment, the glow of the meal lantern casting a soft halo around her. In the hush, she replayed Becky's earlier smirk, the inflection of her "ma'am," the way she had skirted around Octavia's tableau like it didn't belong. Those moments now felt like an indictment of every flight she'd taken. Dozens of trips across continents, countless layovers, repeated slights that added up like grains of sand. As the plane tilted for descent, Octavia took one last sip of chamomile tea. She glanced out the window at the inky sky and whispered to herself, "No one gets to erase my presence." And in that vow lay the enduring power of her silent empire, an empire of schools, of policies, of children's futures, and of her own unwavering integrity. On the 42nd floor of a sleek glass tower in New Haven, Connecticut, Aaliyah Grant leaned forward in her ergonomic chair, eyes fixed on an array of flickering windows. The GP41 alert had landed less than 2 minutes ago, and the internal ethics response dashboard was filling with real-time data. Aaliyah's fingers flew over the keyboard as she cross-referenced passenger manifests, service logs, and video timestamps. Within seconds, she had assembled a concise dossier: the tray exchange, Becky Whitmore's dismissive shrug, and the timestamps marking every moment of unequal treatment. She opened another tab labeled Partnership Matrix and scrolled until she found the entry for Arab Education Alliance, AEA. Sure enough, Stratus Air was listed as the official carrier for the AEA's flagship Gulf Initiative, a direct connection to the $3.2 billion agreement Dr. Octavia Monroe was about to finalize. Aaliyah's breath hitched for a moment. Should the AEA discover a discrimination scandal tied to their chosen airline, the entire project would stall. She didn't hesitate. Within 5 keystrokes, she drafted a secure email to Helene Al-Fahim, AEA Undersecretary for Partnerships. Subject: Urgent Ethics Inquiry. Stratus Air Flight 917. Body: under Clause 14.b of our partnership agreement, we have reason to believe a senior guest experienced discriminatory service aboard Flight 917. We request an immediate ethics review. Pending resolution, all initial funding disbursements are on hold. Aaliyah paused only to add a time-stamped screenshot of Becky's recorded shrug, then hit send. Back in the cabin, Octavia's watch vibrated once more, a gentle pulse that was invisible to everyone around her. She glanced down. AEA funding, on hold. Compliance case, open. She exhaled slowly, as though letting go of a held breath. The Alliance's response would ripple outward, into boardrooms, trading floors, and potentially every capital involved in the Gulf Initiative. For now, though, her focus remained sharp. The system she'd engineered was moving with precision. Half a world away, in Geneva, Charles Edmonds paced in his spacious office at Stratus Air headquarters. A red banner blinked on his secure interface. Emergency Protocol 41, Flight 917. Discrimination report. Action required. He reached for his desk phone and dialed the head of Global Compliance, then held the line while the executive confirmed receipt of Aaliyah's dossier. Yes, Mr. Edmonds, we have the video feed, customer logs, and partnership clause. The AEA has frozen disbursements pending our investigation. A beat of silence, then Edmonds' voice, measured and firm. Activate containment. Issue a suspension order for Ms. Whitmore, effective immediately. Prepare a public apology and notify PR to draft the statement. I want a full board meeting in 30 minutes. Geneva's financial district was already abuzz. Screens in brokerage firms flashed alerts, and traders noted the sudden dip in Stratus Air's stock price. Within minutes, the ticker showed a 3.6% decline as investors reacted to potential reputational damage. Around the globe, client accounts pinged automated warnings. Stratus Air partner status under review in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Cairo, cities where AEA ministers had once toasted future classrooms. Office phones rang off the hook. Helene Al-Fahim met with her legal team, who poring over the partnership agreement's ethics clause. A small army of assistants printed the email thread, stapled the logs, and delivered them to the Undersecretary's secure conference room. Word spread quickly. Funding would pause until Stratus Air satisfied every requirement of Clause 14.b, including a full audit of cabin crew training and a corrective action plan approved by AEA. At the same time, international investors in the Abu Dhabi Education Fund convened an emergency call. Sovereign wealth representatives asked tough questions. Can we trust our partner to honor commitments without bias? For Octavia's foundation, this was critical. Any delay would affect construction crews on the ground, displaced budgets, and training schedules for hundreds of educators. Yet she let the system do the work. Data and protocols had become her voice. Back on Flight 917, the cabin lights dimmed for a brief moment, signaling an in-flight briefing. Octavia noted the change, her fingers resting on the leather armrest. The hush deepened as Daniel Klein, the junior attendant, paused at her row. He cleared his throat, voice low. Dr. Monroe, our compliance team has been notified. All further service requests will be handled personally by senior staff. Please let me know if there is anything you need. His eyes conveyed respect and a hint of relief, as though he too understood the weight of what had transpired. Octavia inclined her head once, accepting a fresh glass of water. She did not comment on the unfolding crisis or mention the AEA's hold. she didn't have to. The serving galley behind Daniel was now a cordoned-off zone, the crew operating under strict new guidelines. Becky Whitmore remained out of sight, her uniform replaced by a plain jumper borrowed from the galley staff. Through the cabin windows, a sunrise tinted the sky in soft pink and gold. Somewhere below, the Atlantic waves glimmered like liquid glass. In that moment of calm, Octavia reflected on the power of invisible levers, a clause tucked into legal text, a silent data feed, and the ripple effect that stretched from New Haven to Geneva to Abu Dhabi. The world could no longer ignore her presence, nor the presence of those she represented. Soon, the cockpit announced descent, and soft chimes signaled landing preparations. Octavia felt another vibration, this one a notification confirming the AEA's direct response. Funding hold confirmed, review pending. A month's worth of installments paused. Project managers would need to answer for timelines, but for Dr. Monroe, this was the payoff of precision. No grandstanding, no viral videos, just the quiet assertion of rights through systems she helped shape. She exhaled and allowed herself a momentary smile. The sunrise was brighter now, the horizon stretching wide with possibility. Octavia sorted her notes, turning the page on her tablet to final bullet points for the AEA contract. She would arrive in Abu Dhabi not merely as a distinguished keynote speaker, but as the architect of accountability, a reminder that respect, once encoded in policy, could not be denied. As the plane touched down, she sat perfectly still, her silhouette framed by the cabin door's warm glow. The systems had spoken. The protocols had held. And somewhere between the fade of engine roar and the hush of brakes, Octavia Monroe prepared to step into the next chapter, where silence was her ally, and systems were her voice. The cabin lights had been dimmed for the in-flight entertainment briefing, and a gentle hush settled over Stratus Air Flight 917. Octavia Monroe leaned back against the sumptuous leather of Seat 1A, arms folded, watching as the crew moved with precise choreography. To anyone else, it looked like another routine service, attendants gliding through the rows, offering water refills and adjusting blankets. But beneath that veneer of calm, a silent storm was gathering momentum. Becky Whitmore was nowhere to be seen. In her place, Daniel Clean stood at the front of the cabin with a poised smile, greeting each passenger by name. He moved efficiently, though occasionally he cast curious glances toward the galley, where Becky had disappeared behind a sliding partition. The junior attendant's composure suggested relief, but his hesitation around Octavia hinted at the tremor still rippling through the cabin crew. Octavia lifted her teacup to her lips and let the chamomile warmth wash over her. She didn't need to ask what was happening. Her smartwatch had already briefed her at least 5 times. 10 minutes ago, she'd seen the subtle status update. PR draft, apology statement in progress. 8 minutes ago, she'd watched her secure chat light up with a notification that the Stratus Air Board was convening an emergency session in Geneva. 6 minutes ago, she'd felt the thrum of stock alert, 4.2%, as brokers responded to the unfolding crisis. And 2 minutes ago, the AEA had confirmed an extended freeze. All disbursements on hold until compliance audit complete. No one in first class knew any of that. To them, it was simply a slightly awkward service, as an unfamiliar face took over for their beloved stewardess. They murmured polite thanks to Daniel. They settled back in their seats, dimming their screens to watch the westerns or documentaries the cabin system offered. The jet engines growled on autopilot, gliding smoothly above the Atlantic night. Octavia's gaze drifted toward the row behind her, where a silver-haired oil executive tapped on his tablet, presumably checking market updates. She could practically see the little red arrows dancing beside Stratus Air, STR, on his screen before his assistant deftly closed the browser tab. A few rows over, an Emirati dignitary fiddled with the in-flight Wi-Fi portal, seeking stock quotes or press releases. They were all connected, invisible threads binding the cabin to boardrooms across 3 continents. Daniel returned to Octavia's aisle with a fresh water carafe. He poured, hands firmer now, eyes steadier. "Anything else I can bring you, Dr. Monroe?" he asked, voice soft and genuine. Octavia offered a small, knowing nod. "No, thank you, Daniel. This is perfect." She caught the flicker of gratitude in his eyes. This wasn't just another service correction. It was an unspoken pledge that service meant respect. Behind the curtain of the galley, the senior flight team gathered in hurried conference. A muted tablet displayed Edmonds's order. "Coordinate immediate PR release, notify all HQ channels, prepare statement." Their voices were muted to the cabin, but Octavia sensed the tension. She had engineered the chain reaction to unfold precisely under the radar of theatrical outrage. No viral video, no shouting match, no hashtag campaign. Just systems and protocols doing their work. A hush fell as the seatbelt sign blinked, signaling Carol, the lead ground attendant in Abu Dhabi, to stand by for landing procedures. Another ripple in the chain, another moment when the inside would catch up with the outside. Octavia allowed her mind to drift for a moment back to the schools under construction in remote desert villages. The architects there had been waiting all week for funding confirmation. Now, that money was paused, held in abeyance until Stratus Air proved it could uphold its own ethics as promised. Ministers in Abu Dhabi were poring over Clause 14BB of the partnership agreement, finding in it a power they hadn't fully appreciated until now. Up above, Becky Whitmore emerged from the galley, her posture stiff, her uniform ill-fitting without the belt that signified her rank. She carried the standard black service folder at her side, no longer slick with the pride of senior cabin crew, but heavy with the weight of her sudden fall from grace. She paused at the curtain, head bowed, before slipping to an empty jump seat near the rear. The other attendants avoided her eyes. To them, she was no longer the stewardess they once admired. She was a cautionary tale. Octavia watched Becky's silhouette retreat and felt a quiet satisfaction settle over her. This wasn't vengeance. It was justice. Systemic, inevitable. Delivered by the very protocols Stratus Air had built to protect its brand. The cold sandwich and the apathetic shrug were just the spark. The real fire had been fanned by data logs, legal clauses, and corporate governance. Daniel approached Octavia again, this time with the dessert trolley, an array of petit four and fruit segments so refined they looked like jewel boxes. "Please enjoy our compliments," he said, placing a delicate raspberry mousse before her. Octavia lifted the silver spoon and paused. She tasted the mousse slowly, letting its sweetness mingle with the steel of her resolve. The cabin lights brightened in preparation for descent. Octavia leaned to the side to retrieve her tablet, opening her notes for the closing segments of the AEA agreement. Her task in Abu Dhabi was not merely to sign a contract, but to ensure that accountability and ethics were woven into every clause, every lecture, and every classroom built under her foundation's banner. She glanced at Becky one last time, slumped in the jump seat, face hidden behind a hurriedly folded blanket. No one offered her a word of comfort. No one clapped or cheered. In the hush of the cabin, Becky was in exile in her own territory, and Octavia, silent and dignified, was the architect of that exile. As the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, please return your seats to the upright position for landing." Octavia straightened. She smoothened her navy suit, folded her napkin, and slipped her tablet into its leather sleeve. In that moment, she felt the full measure of what she had accomplished. A moment of collective reckoning that required no spectacle, only the quiet application of power. The plane's landing gear deployed with a soft thrum. The cabin lights shifted to a hopeful glow, and Octavia Monroe remained poised. Her empire of education, her silent protocols, her unspoken voice, ready to step into the next chapter of her mission. In the weeks to come, articles would appear, investors would demand briefings, and a global airline would rewrite its ethics policies. But here, at 37,000 feet, she had already achieved the unthinkable. Respect codified, systems speaking in her favor, and a flight attendant's career undone. All through the simple elegance of a silent protocol unleashed. The landing gear descended with a soft thrum, and the cabin lights brightened as Flight 917 touched down on Abu Dhabi's runway. Octavia Monroe sat perfectly still, the clink of her teacup against the tray table the only sound she made. Around her, the other passengers began to stir. Seat belts clicked, screens shut off, overhead bins popped open. For most, it was just another international arrival. For Octavia, it was the moment when everything she had set in motion would come into sharp focus. At the front of the cabin, behind the curtain that hid the galley, two men in dark suits stood waiting. One carried a folder stamped "Confidential, Immediate Review." The other held a tablet glowing with new messages. The junior attendant, Daniel Clean, caught Octavia's eye and gave a respectful nod. Then, ever so smoothly, he stepped back and allowed them to step forward. "Dr. Monroe," one of the men said, his voice firm but deferential. "I'm Brandon Ellis, Regional Director for Europe at Stratus Air. This is Ms. Karen Dufresne, Head of Global Service Culture. On behalf of Charles Edmonds and the entire board, please accept our sincerest apologies for the treatment you received." His tone was low, almost intimate, so that only Octavia and Daniel could hear. Octavia inclined her head once, the slightest motion. She didn't smile, didn't look away. She simply let the words settle in the hush of the cabin. Behind her, Daniel guided the other passengers toward the exit, while the two executives ushered Octavia through the curtain into a narrow aisle that led to the forward door. On the jet bridge, a small group of Stratus personnel, 3 in crisp uniforms and 2 wearing red badges, waited at the end of the walkway. They formed a discreet barrier between the plane door and the bustling terminal. Octavia passed through without hesitation, her navy suit immaculately pressed, her leather briefcase in hand. Cameras flashed from news crews who had been tipped off, mobile phones lifted above heads to capture the moment. A hush fell over the throng as she appeared. Becky Whitmore emerged a few paces behind Octavia, escorted by 2 internal security officers. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her blonde bun slightly untidy. She clutched a standard-issue binder labeled Emergency Ethics Interview, its pages filled with logs, screenshots, and a copy of Clause 14.b from the AEA MOU. Becky's steps were hesitant, her uniform too large now that her senior crew sash had been removed. Octavia paused at the bottom of the stairs. Reporters' microphones jutted forward, but she offered no comment. Instead, she raised her chin and let the cameras frame her calm dignity. The executives by her side stepped forward, forming a shield between her and the flashbulbs. Then, as though rehearsed, they parted to let Octavia pass. Behind her, Becky was led down a side corridor, past a line of stunned passengers who recognized her for the first time, not as the friendly face of first class, but as the center of a scandal. A cluster of uniformed HR officials and legal advisors stood at the corridor's end. A metal door marked Interview Room 2 swung silently open. Inside, the room was stark. A small table with 2 chairs, a recording camera in one corner, and a stern-faced investigator waiting with a tablet. Becky was seated, the binder at her side. The investigator tapped the tablet and the screen flickered to life, playing the clip of Becky's dismissive shrug and the discarded chicken sandwich. Becky's face drained of color. "Ms. Whitmore," the investigator began, voice neutral, "we will ask you to explain why Dr. Monroe's special meal request was not honored, while other passengers received full service. This interview is recorded and may be used in disciplinary proceedings up to and including termination." Her tone left no room for equivocation. Becky opened her mouth, closed it, and finally whispered, It was a system error. I didn't realize." The investigator raised a hand. "Review the boarding manifest, your internal complaint logs, and your past incident reports. Then we'll continue." Outside, in the main terminal, Octavia was escorted into a waiting black Mercedes. The door closed behind her with a soft click. She took a breath, motionless, as the car pulled away. Behind the tinted windows, reporters clamored to catch a glimpse. A voice crackled in her ear from Daniel's earpiece. AEA Undersecretary has confirmed funding hold until final report. Board meeting scheduled in 1 hour. Octavia adjusted her briefcase on her lap. She felt the familiar steadiness settle in her chest. Everything was unfolding according to plan. The flight attendants firing midair, the immediate ethics interview on the jet bridge, the AEA's funding freeze, and now the board's emergency meeting. The protocols she had coded into the system, legal clauses, AI-driven cameras, secure alerts, had executed flawlessly. In the Abu Dhabi VIP arrival lounge, ministers from the Arab Education Alliance were gathered over ornate coffee urns and dates. Their undersecretary, Helene Al-Fahim, emerged from a private enclave and raised a hand, signaling silence. "The carrier has acknowledged the breach of conduct," she announced. "We await the final report, but let us commend Dr. Monroe's steadfastness. Our partnership depends on integrity." Heads nodded, and a murmur of agreement rippled through the group. At Stratus Air's regional office in Geneva, Charles Edmonds sat at the head of a long mahogany table. His executive team assembled, legal counsel, HR director, head of communications, each with a printed dossier on Flight 917. Edmonds tapped his pen thrice. "We have executed Emergency Protocol 41, he said. "Ms. Whitmore's interim review is underway. We will issue a public apology to Dr. Monroe by tomorrow morning. And effective immediately, Octavia Monroe will serve as our external advisor on service culture reform." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. The HR director cleared his throat. "Sir, inviting Dr. Monroe to advise Stratus Air on policy. That's unprecedented." Edmonds leaned in, voice low but resolute. "She holds the leverage. We either learn from her example or risk losing every partnership that bets on our brand. This is not a concession. It's an investment in our future." As the Mercedes carried Octavia toward the convention center where the AEA ceremony would resume, she offered no commentary. She had refrained from drama, no grand speeches mid-flight, no social media campaign. Instead, she wielded the quiet power of systems and protocols. The runway showdown had unfolded exactly as she envisioned. Discrimination exposed, protocols enforced, institutions realigned. Her phone buzzed with a final secure message from Aaliyah. "Board meeting, Octavia Monroe, external advisor on service ethics." Octavia set the phone aside, staring out at the glowing tarmac lights. She allowed herself a single, genuine nod, a silent acknowledgement that the system had spoken, and respect had been reclaimed. Soon, she would step into the hall, not as an aggrieved passenger, but as the architect of accountability. And at that moment, the real work would begin. Octavia Monroe sat quietly as the replacement crew completed the landing service. A new flight attendant, crisp and attentive, approached with a final tray of mint-infused water and warm towels. The contrast was stark, professionalism restored, respect re-established. Octavia accepted the towel and let its soft warmth calm her shoulders. No words were exchanged, but the gesture spoke louder than any apology Becky Whitmore could ever muster. Behind her, the cabin door opened to reveal a line of Stratus Air executives waiting to greet her. Brandon Ellis and Karen Dufresne stood at each side, their faces measured but respectful. In silence, they escorted her down the aisle, past passengers who offered nods of gratitude. A few held up their phones, capturing the moment. Octavia offered the smallest of smiles, enough to acknowledge their support, but not so much that it felt performative. On the jet bridge, a low hum of cameras and whispered questions followed her. Instead of pausing to speak, Octavia lifted her chin and stepped through, letting her composed demeanor answer for her. Behind her, two security officers led Becky Whitmore toward the emergency interview room, Reporters snapped images of Becky's crestfallen posture, but she refused to look up. In that moment, her silence was the final indictment. At the foot of the stairs, Octavia reached the black Mercedes, waiting to drive her to the Abu Dhabi Education Alliance Summit. Before she climbed in, she turned back once, scanning the jet bridge lined with uniformed staff and intent observers. No one spoke. No one cheered. They simply stood witness to a quiet assertion of power that needed no fanfare. Inside the car, Octavia closed her eyes and let the city lights blur by. A secure message popped on her tablet. PR release. Published. Statement live at 14:05 UTC. Stratus Air regrets the recent incident aboard Flight 91 She tapped the notification and scanned the official apology. It was concise and contrite, promising systemic reforms and mandatory bias training for all crew. Better late than never, she thought. But the real change was already underway, encoded in protocols, AI logs, and a shared conviction that respect could be enforced. Her phone buzzed again, an invitation to join Stratus Air's Service Ethics Advisory Board, signed by Charles Edmonds. Octavia allowed herself a small nod of approval. She had never sought a title here, only accountability. The car slowed as it entered the VIP lane at the conference center. 2 undersecretaries from the Arab Education Alliance stood waiting, their expressions a mixture of relief and admiration. Helene Al-Fahim extended her hand. Dr. Monroe, your steadfast action has upheld our partnership's integrity. We are honored to welcome you. Octavia clasped the handshake, her grip firm. She did not boast. Instead, she felt the gravity of each step. Inside the grand hall, ministers and dignitaries rose in quiet recognition as she passed. The ceremony resumed with a subtle shift in tone. What had begun as a routine signing became a silent testament to the power of principles. Cameras followed her to the stage, but Octavia paused at the podium and simply looked out over the audience. The room fell still, waiting. She pressed a button on her tablet, and the headline on the projection screen changed from Abu Dhabi Education Summit to Integrity First, a new chapter begins. Octavia cleared her throat and spoke in a calm, steady voice. True partnership is built on respect, not just agreements. Thank you for trusting me to uphold both. Her words were brief, but in the hush that followed, they resonated louder than any speech. She stepped down, leaving the stage with dignity intact. No cheers erupted, just a profound silence filled with acknowledgement. As she walked toward the exit, Octavia reflected on the journey from a cold sandwich tray to reshaping a global airline's ethics. The power of silence, she knew, was more formidable than the loudest protest. And in that silence, she had already changed the rules for good. The morning after Flight 917's dramatic conclusion, the world awoke to headlines instead of champagne toasts. Stratus Air's stock ticker took a 6% nosedive in pre-market trading as investors digested the abrupt firing of a senior cabin crew member Midair. In Geneva, Charles Edmonds convened an emergency board meeting. Minutes later, an official apology was issued across every Stratus channel. We regret the incident aboard Flight 917 and reaffirm our commitment to equitable service, read the press release, promising a full audit of training protocols. Within hours, institutional investors demanded accountability. 3 sovereign wealth funds, each controlling billions in Stratus shares, issued letters demanding a transparent review of corporate culture. The U.S. Secretary of Transportation personally called to request a formal report on first-class service standards and whether subtle bias had become systemic. Regulators in Europe and the Gulf opened inquiries under their anti-discrimination statutes, each announcement ratcheting up the pressure. Meanwhile, social media erupted under the hashtag #Seat1A. Thousands of posts flooded feeds. Stories of passengers sidelined by indifferent staff, of special requests ignored, of lives diminished by a shrug. A viral clip of Octavia's calm composure against Becky's cold shoulder became a rallying cry for anyone who'd ever felt invisible. News outlets from the New York Times to The Guardian ran multi-page features on hidden biases in luxury travel, all crediting Octavia's silent stand as the spark. Stratus Air responded by rolling out a mandatory unconscious bias training program for 100% of its crew, launching a direct VIP feedback channel with real-time response teams, and pledging to overhaul its service culture curriculum. Press events in London, New York, and Abu Dhabi spotlighted executives taking oaths to serve with dignity and respect. Yet the most unexpected move was the invitation extended to Octavia Monroe herself, an offer to join Stratus Air's inaugural Service Ethics Advisory Board. By midday, Octavia's inbox bulged with similar requests. The Arab Education Alliance invited her to chair a new compliance oversight panel to ensure funding released under the $3.2 billion partnership adhered to ethical standards. NGOs and women leaders networks sent letters asking her to share her framework for silent power, the art of enforcing respect through systems, not speeches. Her phone buzzed with calls from education ministers and social justice advocates alike, seeking guidance on embedding equity into policy. Throughout it all, Octavia remained unflappable. She didn't need a stage or a soundbite. The system she had set in motion, legal clauses, AI-driven evidence gathering, and unambiguous protocols, had done the talking. As she drafted her acceptance for the advisory role at Stratus Air, she reflected on the ripple effect. A single denied meal had ignited a global conversation on dignity. And as boardrooms and parliaments scrambled to catch up, she knew the real victory lay not in headlines, but in the quiet promise that every passenger, no matter their name or background, deserved to be seen. Octavia Monroe stepped into the softly lit conference room at the Abu Dhabi Summit venue, greeted by 3 young women of color, scholars, teachers, and activists, each with notebooks in hand and eager eyes. They formed a small circle of trust, a counterpoint to the grand ceremony she'd just completed. The patriarchal protocols of boardrooms and legislatures felt miles away here, replaced by something more intimate, the simmering urgency of voices that had long been silenced. "Dr. Monroe," began the first, a doctoral candidate from Cairo. "How do we ensure our systems speak our truth when words fail?" Her question resonated with the weight of every dismissal Octavia had ever endured. Octavia allowed herself a moment of reflection, recalling the hush of the first-class cabin, the cold sandwich, the indifferent shrug, each slight a lesson in silent power. She took a slow breath. "You don't always need to raise your voice," she said softly but firmly. "I've found that when you encode respect into policies, be it an ethical clause in a contract or an AI-driven alert, systems become your megaphone. They document every slight, trigger every review, and leave no room for erasure." She paused, letting the idea settle like seeds in fertile soil. The second woman, a high school teacher from Dubai, nodded. "But fear of repercussions can paralyze us," she admitted. Octavia smiled kindly. "Accountability is a two-way street. When you set clear criteria for inclusion, training requirements, feedback channels, equitable service standards, you protect the ones who might be overlooked. You create a culture where bias can't hide behind courtesy." The third, an NGO director from Amman, asked, "And what about those who aren't CEOs or ministry officials? How can they wield the same influence?" Octavia's eyes softened. "Start local. Draft your own protocols. Student councils with transparent grievance procedures, board charters for community organizations, even family agreements that honor every member's dignity. It's the cumulative effect of small systems that shifts the entire structure." A hush fell as Octavia reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a slender envelope addressed to a 16-year-old girl in Florida, a student who'd written to thank her after seeing the viral clip from Flight 917. Octavia handed it to the third woman. "Share this," she said. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Never let silence be mistaken for consent. You have the right to sit in seat 1A of any room, physical or metaphorical, where decisions are made. If no one offers your place, claim it through the rules you helped define. The women smiled, passing the letter among themselves. In their eyes, Octavia saw the reflection of futures she had tirelessly championed. Classrooms where every child's name was pronounced correctly, boardrooms where every voice carried weight, and cabins where no passenger was deemed unworthy. As they rose to leave, Octavia offered one final thought. Change happens when we design our systems for inclusion, then hold them accountable. Respect isn't delivered on a silver platter. It's written into the code of the institutions we build. Outside the conference room, the glow of the desert sun carried the promise of new beginnings. Octavia Monroe walked toward it, footsteps steady and unhurried, knowing the ripples of her silent revolution would continue long after the headlines faded. Have you ever felt unseen in a space you deserve to occupy? Share your experience below. We'd love to hear how you're writing respect into your world.